if you have trust issues, life is going to be very difficult for you in general. And if you have trust issues with God, life's going to be miserable for you because you're going to have a whole lot of your life that makes zilcho sense. God's ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. He's working something out in us. Be patient with it. You guys ready for a long trip? I'm very excited about this book. Actually, we probably are going to be in 1 Samuel, and then we'll go right into 2 Samuel, because 2 Samuel is where it really gets good. 1 Samuel is really neat, but 2 Samuel is where we really get into a lot of the life of David. So we're probably going to be, this journey is probably going to take us a couple of years or a year and a half or so to get through all of this. Maybe that scares you all off, I'm not sure. But there are some awesome stories in this book and in the preceding book, or in the following book, I should say. Now, let me set the book up for you a little bit. We're obviously talking about the nation of Israel. They are in a time of absolute chaos, is the best way that I can describe it. It's a time of really up and down. In your Bible, the book before 1 Samuel is the book of Ruth. You need to understand, in the Jewish Bible, the Ruth's not there. The book before 1 Samuel is the book of Judges. And that kind of flows in the chronological events. Ruth happened kind of in the time of the Judges. So that's how it's kind of laid out in our Bible. But it goes from the book of Judges into the book of 1 Samuel. So let me read for you the last verse out of Judges chapter 21. And this kind of sets up then what's going to happen in 1 Samuel 1. It says, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes." Okay, so I want you to kind of picture what our society would be like if everybody did what they wanted to do. If everybody did what was right in their eyes. Okay, how chaotic would our society be? Well, the nation of Israel is in a time of chaos. Everybody's doing what they want to do. Everybody's living a lifestyle that they want to live. There's just absolute chaos. So then we come to 1 Samuel, and this is where, what do you need if there's chaos in a nation? What do you need if there's chaos in an organization? What do you need if there's chaos in a family? You need a leader. You need somebody to lead. So what God does in Samuel is he raises up some leaders who are now going to help this country come out of their chaos. And one of the first people that he uses to lead them out of their chaos is a prophet, and his name is Samuel. So this is Samuel's birth is talked about in 1 Samuel chapter 1. Now, I titled the message today, Hannah, the Profile of a Great Mother, and I wish I would have titled it different, but we'd already printed the bulletins, and I wanted to change it. But the reason why I wanted to change it is because a lot of times when people see this, the profile of a great mother, anybody that's not a mother in the room checks out. Okay, and this is why I don't, like on Mother's Day and Father's Day, I don't preach specialized sermons because of the fact that there's still a lot of different people in here. Now, I just want to say this. Everybody in the room can learn from Hannah. Whether you're a mother, whether you're a father, whether you're single. So I don't want you to say, well, he's talking to moms. I'm not a mom. I'm a dad. I'm single. I won't have anything to do with this sermon. So don't check out, okay? So hang with me through this text. Because Hannah is a woman of God. She is an extraordinary woman that God used in a spectacular way. And she deals with a lot of the stuff that you and I deal with. So let's look at 1 Samuel. And I'm just going to skip down to verse number 2 because there's a bunch of really hard names to pronounce in verse number 1. And I practice these names, but I know that I'm going to butcher them. So you go home and you get somebody that's on audio tape that speaks well, and you listen to that, and let me give you the characters. There's a man, his name is Elkanah, and he is mentioned in verse number 1. This is the husband. And then we're introduced to Hannah in verse number 2. Verse 2 says, "And he had 2 wives. The name of the one was Hannah, and the name of the other was Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children." Okay, so this man is a polygamist. He has more than one wife. Now, because this is in the Bible, it's very important for me to explain this. Because this is in the Bible doesn't mean that God is for polygamy. In fact, we know that God is against it. But we also know that culture changes us. Culture, in a sense, we kind of want to adapt to culture rather than adapting to what God wants. God's plan for the family is one man, one woman for one life. That's God's plan. It's not one man with 3 women or one man with 2 women, or that's not God's plan. God's plan is one man with one woman for one life. That's kind of his view of the family. It was established in Genesis when God made Adam and Eve, and it hasn't really changed. Now, society has changed, and we have changed in the sense that we think that we have progressed and that this is really the way, but God's way is always the best way, okay? Now, let me explain a little bit what's going on here. Is in the Jewish culture, if you were married, you saw children as a gift of God. In fact, one of the Psalms, I think it's Psalms 127, it says, "Blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them." So in other words, so the Jewish culture is you got married and you had as many children as possible. Okay? Now we stopped at 3, and I'm not, you want to have 15 kids, God bless you, God be with you. I was not wired that way, okay? So, but in this Jewish culture, they wanted to have as many kids. So the more kids you had, the more blessed you were by God. So if I have 15 kids, then God has bountifully poured out his blessings upon me. Now, I don't really know what y'all think about that, but that's how they viewed it, okay? So a woman who could not have children was seen as cursed by God. So a woman who couldn't have children in the culture, not because she is, but because that's how the culture viewed her. So this is where the polygamy came in. Because in the Jewish culture, if a woman could not, if she did not give a husband a child, or did not give let me say this even more than that, give the husband a male to carry on the name, then after 10 years, that man had the right in Jewish culture to divorce his wife because she didn't give him any kids. That's how a big a deal this is. I believe that this man, Elkanah, I believe he loves Hannah. He loves his wife, because we're going to see that in a minute. And yet he kind of caves to the culture, and so he marries this other woman, Peninnah, because he's seen as, man, I got to have kids. I got to keep the name going. So that's what's going on here. And so that's why he has 2 wives. It doesn't mean that God approves of it. It just means that this is the culture and this is what's going on. So verse 3 says, "This man went up from his city yearly to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. And the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, the priests of the Lord, were there. And whenever the time came for Elkanah to make an offering, he would give portions to Peninnah his wife and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he would give a double portion, for he loved Hannah, although the Lord had closed her womb." Now this is an interesting word in verse number 6. It says, "And her rival also provoked her severely." Okay, that's an interesting term, isn't it? So you have KU and K-State, they're rivals. You have rivals in a family? How's that going to be? It's going to be chaos. It's going to be difficult. So you have this woman, Peninnah, you have this woman, Hannah. They're competing for the attention of this one man. This is why polygamy is not a good idea. Okay? And God never approves of it, but they buy into this culture of, man, my wife's cursed because we don't have a kid. God must not be happy with her. I better get another wife so we can have kids. And so I can say, hey, God's favorable. You know, God looks at me with favor because I have kids. So, but this situation here has created a lot of chaos in the home. Because not only it says her rival also provoked her severely to make her miserable, because the Lord had closed her womb. So, in other words, let me translate it into modern language. Peninnah is throwing in Hannah's face that Oh, God must not be happy with you. Look how many kids I have. God must be pleased with you and must be displeased with you and pleased with me, and just kind of, pregnant again. Oh, pregnant again. This is what's going on. Now, when I say Hannah, the profile of a great mother, this first kind of part of this text gives us the first thing about great moms. Great mothers, and I would say this, great people in general have great problems. Great mothers have great problems. Now, what's her problem? She's barren. She's not able to have children. In fact, what does the text say? God has closed her womb. She's being mocked by this other wife of Elkanah, Peninnah. She's being mocked by Peninnah. So she's kind of being ridiculed and constantly being put down. She's having great problems. She's also misunderstood by her husband, which we're going to talk more about in a minute. But she has great problems, okay? And this is very key to life, and this is very key to our relationship with God. Because problems can do one of two things to you. They can either drive you from God, or they can drive you to God. So here is this woman who has great problems. She is barren. She is misunderstood by her husband. She is mocked by this other woman in the house, Peninnah, this other wife of Elkanah. She's mocked by him. She has great problems. But Hannah, instead of letting her problems drive her from God, it drives her to God. Because I want you to notice what happens. It says, verse 7, so it was year by year that she went up to the house of the Lord. Even though her womb is closed, even though she's not having children, even though she misunderstands what God is doing, she doesn't understand what God is doing, she still continues to go to worship and worship God because her problems are not driving her from God, but driving her to God. And I just want to give you a couple of statements to maybe write down or think about a little bit when you're going through the pain that you're going through. When you have pain, God has a plan. When you have pain, God has a plan. He's doing something. He's up to something. So don't let the pain drive you from God, but rather let the pain drive you to God. When you are at your worst, God is at work. He is up to something. And that's what's going on here. And this woman, Hannah, one of the things that makes her a great woman is she had great problems, but she believed in a great God that was working things out. Okay? So great mothers have great problems. The problems are often the things that drive us to God, which makes us usable to God. And this is what we see in the life of Hannah. So that's the first thing I'd like you to notice about her. Number two, the second thing I'd like you to notice about Hannah and great mothers in general, great mothers keep great priorities. Notice what it says in verse 7. Year after year, she went up to the house of the Lord. So she had great priorities. What do we learn about Hannah from the text? We learn that she loved God, and God was a priority in her life. You need a set of priorities that you're going to live your life with. I heard a funny story this week about how this couple went to church, and they're in the car after church. They're driving home, and at church that day they had baby dedication, and this one boy in the car had been dedicated, and so they're riding in the car on the way home, and the kid's crying uncontrollably, and the parents can't get the kid to calm down, and he's like, "What's wrong? What's wrong, son?" And he finally says, "When that pastor was dedicating me, he said that he wanted me to grow up in a Christian home, but I want to stay with you guys." I thought that was a great story. Oops. So what's the priorities in that family? It's not Christianity. It's not God. It's not the things of God. Hannah has her priorities in order. She loves God and she loves her husband. And that's very important to understand. especially when kids come into the picture, especially you couples in the room, if I can just talk specialized here. God put you as a husband and wife together. The greatest testimony that you can be to your children is to love your mate with all your heart. See, what happens in the American home is we have kids, our life revolves around our kids, and we abandon our mate, and then our kids leave, and we're like, oh no. And what we showed in essence that our priorities were out of whack to begin with. The priority in the family should always be towards the mate that God has placed you with. Children are a gift from God that God has placed in our life so that we can raise them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, and then when they get old enough, we release them to the world. That's the plan. Why did everybody laugh? I don't know why people are laughing. Because that's not the culture, right? The culture says we're to hold our kids, and our kids are not to leave us, and this is kind of the culture that we have. But this woman has her priorities in order. She loves her God, and she loves her husband. That's why what she does at the end of this book is not hard, because she has her priorities in order. Samuel does not become a God to her, but God is God to her, and she loves her husband more than she loves her kids. She sees her kids as gifts from God. And this is the problems we have in life is because we get our priorities out of order. We put our kids become our gods, entertainment becomes our gods, our jobs become our God, God needs to be God, and everything else needs to fall into place. Great mothers keep great priorities, and this is a woman who, even though she is barren, even though she's having a difficult time in life, she is still worshiping God. She's still making it a priority in her life. The third thing I want you to notice is in verses 7 and 8. Great mothers make great choices. Great mothers make great choices. Notice what it says. So it was year by year that she went up to the house of the Lord, that she provoked her. Who provoked her? Well, Peninnah provoked her, right? Peninnah provoked her. Therefore, she wept and did not eat. This is affecting her emotionally. It's affecting her physically. She did not eat. Then Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? Now, this is so man here, right? This is me to my wife 10 years ago. Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? And why is your heart grieved? Am I not better to you than 10 sons? No. No, you're not. She's like, in other words, isn't I, how can I say this correct English? Aren't I all you need? That's what, in a sense, he's saying. He doesn't get his wife. Doesn't make him a bad dude. It just means that he doesn't get his wife. He's like, look, when we go to the temple, I give you twice what I give everybody else. Because this is the man's thing. The man's mentality is I want to work 15 jobs so I can give you stuff because this is the way that I show my love. And women don't necessarily always see it that way. And this is the guy. He's like, look, I give you all this stuff. Haven't I more than 10 sons? But no, that she wanted a child more than anything. Now, I point that out because great mothers make great choices. And this is great people in general make great choices. So she has a choice. She has this woman, Peninnah, who the Bible calls her rival, right? So she has a choice in how she's going to respond to this woman. How does she respond to this woman? Does she strike back at her? I don't see anywhere in the text where she does. She chooses not to strike back at Peninnah. She chooses not to get revenge. She doesn't devote her life to this. And this is what happens with a lot of us is that people hurt us and then we spend our entire life trying to get them back. And we're diverted from what God's trying to do in our heart. We want to make people pay because of how they've hurt us. And man, Peninnah, she deserves it. Like I want my wife to slap this woman. Right? Just kind of like, man, you're mean. This is vicious. Leave poor Hannah alone. But Hannah doesn't spend her life trying to get back at Peninnah. So she chooses not to strike back at Peninnah. She chooses not to be angry at Elkanah. Elkanah misunderstands her. Elkanah misunderstands himself. Elkanah thinks that, man, I can bring you the same satisfaction a child can, when the reality he can't. He's a good husband. He's a loving husband. He's a good man, it appears, with maybe some poor choices. But she chooses not to be angry at him. I'm not going to be angry. I don't read anywhere in the text where she says, I can't believe you said that to me. She chooses not to be angry at him. She chooses to forgive him. And to me, a big one is she chooses not to be bitter at God. The Lord closed her womb. Isn't that what the text said? The Lord closed her womb. You know, we have a son and a daughter-in-law, Matt and Rachel, and I made the mistake a long time ago when we found out that Rachel was pregnant for the first time, and I shared that whole story with the church about how that she was pregnant, and then she wasn't, and the call that we had at our house, and I'll never forget the comment that she made. She said, Dad, I'm sad about this, but I'm not mad at God about it. I think that's a great choice. So, by the grace of God, she's pregnant again, and so we just pray for that. They hear a heartbeat. Things seem to be going well right now. So I could be a grandpa here coming up in a little bit, but we're just committing it to God, right? And Rachel is committing it to God, and Matthew is committing it to God. Because look, you're going to have things in your life happen to you that you don't understand, and it requires a choice to not be angry at God. Not let the situation turn you from God. I don't see that in Hannah. She keeps going to worship. She keeps praying to God. She chose to not be bitter at God. And then I think one of the greatest choices she makes is she chose to pray. So she's got this hurt. She's being hurt by this rival in her life. She's being misunderstood by her husband. Her husband can't understand, look, I didn't divorce you, and I take care of you more than I take care of anybody else, and why can't that just satisfy you? And she doesn't get angry at him because he doesn't understand her. She loves him anyway. She doesn't get mad at God or bitter at God. She instead chooses to pray, and that's what takes us to verse number 9. Because great mothers pray great prayers. So Hannah arose after they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh. Now Eli the priest was sitting at the seat by the doorpost of the tabernacle of the Lord. And she was in bitterness. Now Eli is the high priest, okay? One of the ways that you know a society is in trouble is when the leaders of the church are in trouble. I mean, when they're ungodly. Let me tell you something. Eli and his boys are a mess. We're going to talk more about them later. Eli is massively obese. He's so obese that he sits on this stool and leans up against, because he's not taking care of himself. In fact, the way that he dies is he falls off the stool, breaks his neck. I mean, he's this guy who's doesn't really care about people, but he's observing people from a distance. His sons are a disaster. They're actually they're doing terrible sexual acts inside the temple. I mean, it's just a mess. Inside the tabernacle, I should say. It's just a mess. So Hannah goes to the temple, or goes to the tabernacle, and she wants to pray, and Eli, the high priest, is sitting there. It says in verse 10, and she was in bitterness of soul and prayed to the Lord and wept in anguish. Then she made a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on my affliction of your maidservant and remember me and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a male child, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of my life, and no razor shall come upon his head. And it happened as she continued praying before the Lord that Eli watched her mouth. So he's watching this woman. And now Hannah spoke in her heart. Only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli thought she was drunk. So he doesn't understand this woman. He doesn't get to know this woman. He just sees her mouth moving, and she is upset. She is crying from the depths of her soul, okay? So what does he do? So Eli said to her, jumping to conclusions, "How long will you be drunk? Put your wine away from you." Well, at least he said you shouldn't come to the temple drunk. But he doesn't know that this woman is drunk. Just making this assumption. When she's just praying very intently and says, "But Hannah answered and said, 'No, my Lord, I am a woman of sorrowful spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor intoxicating drink, but have poured out my soul before the Lord. Do not consider your maidservant a wicked woman, for out of the abundance of my complaint and grief I have spoken until now.' Then Eli said, 'Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition which you have asked of him.'" What does this woman do? She makes a choice not to be mad at, not to spend her life getting back at Peninnah, not to be angry at Elkanah, not to become bitter at God. She chooses instead to take her complaint to God in prayer. That's the greatest thing you can do, is pray. We've talked a lot about this. I know in the book of James, we dealt with this over and over. But one of the greatest things you can do is you can take it to somebody who can actually do something about it. And who can do something about it? God can do something about it. So what is your problem? Don't spend your life lashing at people that have done things to you. Spend your life crying out to God, taking your request to him, because great mothers and great people pray great prayers. Number 5, I got to wrap up here. Great mothers have great trust. So she prays this prayer. Eli says, "May the Lord grant your petition." He doesn't know what the petition is, but he just says, "May the Lord grant you the petition." Then verse 18, "And she said, 'Let your maidservant find favor in your sight.' So the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad." You know what she said? "Okay, I have given it to God. Now I'm just going to trust God with it, whatever happens." There's nowhere in the text where God necessarily promises her that she's going to have a child. She just asked God for this. She's given it to God. She has committed it to him. Now she's going to trust God that he'll do what's best. That's the way to live. God, I need you to change this person. God, I need you to change this circumstances. So I give it to you, God, and then I trust your will to be done. This is how Jesus taught us to pray, right? "Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done." So this is what I want, God, but I trust you to do what you think is best. I want more than anything to have a child. Not me, this is Hannah now. "Hannah, I want to have a child. God, if you will give me a child, I will give that child back to you to serve in the temple for the rest of his life. But if not, I trust you." That's what great people do. They have great trust. The pastors and I went to Kansas City this week, and we prayed for a great-granddaughter of a couple that goes to our church. And when we lay our hands on people and we pray for them, we pray, "God, please heal this baby, but not our will, but yours be done." And we can leave here knowing that God is writing that girl's story, and God is writing your story, and there has to come a point where you just trust him. If you don't have trust, if you have trust issues, life is going to be very difficult for you in general. And if you have trust issues with God, life's going to be miserable for you, because you're going to have a whole lot of your life that makes zilcho sense. But great mothers have great trust. Why did God wait so long to give Hannah a kid? I think God waited so long because God needed a prophet. And God knew that he had to get Hannah to this point where she said, "Okay, God, you give me a kid, I'll give it back to you." So it took years and years of sadness and grief and anxiety before she would finally get to the point where, "Okay, God, just give me a kid, I'll give it back to you." God's ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. He's working something out in us. Be patient with him. Number 6, the final thing, great mothers make great plans. So what did God do for her? God gave her a kid, didn't he? Then they rose early in the morning, verse 19, and worshiped before the Lord and returned and came to their house at Ramah. And Elkanah knew Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. So it came to pass in the process of time that Hannah conceived and bore a son and called his name Samuel, saying, because I've asked for him from the Lord. Now the man Elkanah and his house went up to offer to the Lord the yearly sacrifice and his vows, but Hannah did not go up, for she said to her husband, not until the child is weaned, then I will take him, that he may appear before the Lord and remain there forever. So Elkanah, her husband, said to her, do what seems best to you. Wait until you have weaned him. Only let the Lord establish his word. Then the woman stayed and nursed her son until she had weaned him. And when she had weaned him, she took him up with her with 3 bowls, one ephah of flour and a skin of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord in Shiloh, and the child was young. Then they slaughtered a bull and brought the child to Eli, and she said, O my Lord, as your soul lives, my Lord, I am the woman who stood by you here praying to the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition, which I ask of you. Therefore I have also lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he shall be lent to the Lord. So they worshiped the Lord there. What do I mean by great mothers have great plans? The best days of your life is when you come to the point where you realize that nothing that I have is really mine. I'm just borrowing it for a while. And so my, I can say that's my house and that's my car and these are my clothes and these are my kids. But the reality is none of that's mine. God just lets me use it for a while. So I have a responsibility, especially with my children, to teach them and launch them. Not to hold on to them forever. Great mothers make great plans to give their children back to God. And it's great if we do that in all things in our life. So if you lose a little money in your 401k, you don't flip out. Isn't it funny how you tend not to be as stressed about stuff if it's somebody else's as if it's yours? Right? Like I've seen y'all drive rental cars. Right? Have you ever said that? Oh, that's a rental. See how fast this thing could go. It's a rental. But you baby yours, right? Because you see it as yours. If you see all your stuff is just God's and I'm a steward of it, now I want to be a good steward of whatever God gives me. And I don't think you ought to drive a rental like a rental. I think you ought to take care of it. You ought to be a good steward of it. But the same with your kids. God, I thank you for these kids. They brought a lot of joy to my life, a lot of stress. But ultimately, they're yours. So whatever you want to do with them, God, if you want to use them in the temple, God, if you want to make them missionaries to go around the world and spread the gospel, I'm good with that. They're your kids. It's your stuff. It's your life. And so, Hannah's a great woman. Don't talk about her a lot. We do talk about her every time we ordain, or not ordain, but dedicate children. She's a great woman. And what made her great? Well, 1 Samuel teaches us what made her great. She had great problems, but she didn't let those problems drive her from God. She had great priorities. She loved God most of all. She loved her husband. She made great choices. She chose not to be bitter. She chose not to be angry. She chose not to seek revenge. She chose instead to pray. So great women and great mothers pray great prayers. Great mothers have great trust. This is what made her great. She had great trust in God that He was working something out. And then she had great plans for the future. And the future is, I'm not going to go back on my vow. I'm going to do what I told God I was going to do. So, Hannah reminds me a lot of Mary, the mother of Jesus, right? Very similar. Very similar ladies. Kind of looking at that, looking at you, comparing yourself to her, maybe there's some areas that God pointed out to you that you need to change. Maybe your priorities have gotten out of whack. I don't know per se what's going on in your life, but if God spoke to you today, I want to give you a chance to respond.